Welcome everyone. GD Center of Art is delighted to collaborate with the India International Center for its Meet the Artist program. We're delighted to have the artist, teacher, art historian, and curator Gulammohammed Sheikh in conversation with artist Vasudevan Akhitam on Among Several Cultures and Times for the 253rd Meet the Artist program. JDCA is envisioned as a unique art center that aims to preserve and exhibit its large collection of folk, tribal, traditional, and contemporary art, all under one roof. It is currently under construction in Bhubaneswar, Odisha. Meet the Artist is a permanent program of JD Center of Art where invited artists, craftspersons, or scholars share their work, experiences, and insights through an illustrated talk. Since 2001, 252 such Meet the Artist programs have taken place on every second Saturday of the month. Currently, our sessions are being held online. Gulammohammed Sheikh is an artist, poet, teacher, art historian, and curator. He's played a major role in the development of contemporary art in India since the early 1960s. He took his master's from the Faculty of Fine Arts, Baroda, and ARCA from the Royal College of Art, London. His work has spanned painting, printmaking, digital media, sculpture, and ceramics, and he has been featured in major exhibitions in India and around the world. Sheikh taught art history and painting for over 3 decades at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda and has acted as a curator for significant exhibitions in India as well as in the UK and Australia. He has been an invitee for residencies and lectures at major art centers and universities in India, Europe, USA, China, and Australia. His work is held in public museums and private collections in many parts of the world. He lives and works in Baroda. I'd also like to introduce Vasudevan Akhitam. Vasudevan Akhitam was born in 1958 in Palghar district, Kerala. He did his diploma and post-diploma at the Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University, Baroda, where he studied under Gulammohammed Sheikh. He received the INLAC scholarship to study at the Royal College of Art, London, and has subsequently received the Andrew Lloyd Scholarship and the Fulbright Fellowship. He spent 2 decades teaching at his alma mater and retired as the head of the Department of Faculty of Fine Arts at Baroda. He's had many exhibitions, including one-man shows across the country, and his works are in private and public collections across the country and the world, including the National Gallery of Modern Art, the Kiran Museum, Uttarayan, and many others. Thank you very much for being here, and I welcome you both. And I have to apologize. There'll be Jatin Das joining us very soon, but I hope that you all can start the conversation straight away. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddhartha. Thank you, Jatin Das, Foundation, JD Foundation, for having me on it. Gulammohammed Sheikh was my teacher at the Faculty of Fine Arts, Baroda. He's the main speaker. I am just here, to accompany him, and I don't think I have much contributions to make, as such. But it is always, a great pleasure talking to him. And this is perhaps for the first time, we have some kind of a dialogue which is happening online, even though I think Sheikh Sir has been, giving some talks online, since the, pandemic, started. It's very difficult to sort of talk about, Sheikh Sir. Let me continue to address him, as Sheikh Sir, because I don't know, any other way of addressing him. One thing is that he is a multifaceted, personality in a Tagorean, sense. I can't, think of, many people, like him, today. I can think of perhaps, Satyajit Ray. I can think of, perhaps, K.G. Subramanian, who are, so versatile and multi-layered, like, Sheikh Sir. There may be, many more people like that, but these are the names, which come to my mind, immediately. And to begin with, he is going to talk about, his own painting, in this presentation, even though he's, equally important, writer in Gujarati. In fact, somebody who heralded modernist, poetry in, in Gujarati, as I understand. He's an art historian. He's a curator. Above all this, he's a teacher. He has been referring to this image or shrine, from Rajasthan, folk shrine, called Kawat, which is a single shrine, which is portable and has, many, many doors, which can be opened, one after, other. I somehow feel that in a way it also, represents, Sheikh Sar, himself. There is something of his own self, in it. Because if you keep opening him, you would find, many, many facets, which you don't, really, see, on the surface, or when you look at it, for the first time. To begin with, I would sort of, bring him into the, subject by, asking him to say something about, his, childhood, the, Surendranagar, a small town, Kathiawad. He somewhere, writes that even though, he felt that he has held, the childhood in his arms, it has fallen off. I think he was telling his mother, in the poem, called Father in Dream, that it has fallen off and under the bed, but it's still there under the bed. And it all, starts from, Surendranagar. So let me bring, Sheikh Sar to the picture by requesting him to talk about the provincial town, Kathiawadi town he was born and, brought up in. Thank you.
Let me say hello to Jatin, my friend for literally 50 years or so, Jatin, and that we have known each other and seen each other's work for a long period of time. So it's a pleasure to be here in a center that he has started. I'm also very happy that Vasu has agreed to be with me to, in a way, accompany me in my long, long journey. Now, when you think of a long journey, and if it is, what is it, 70, 80 years, now I'm 85, and even if I were to think in terms of my early days, how to recount? It's not very easy. But let me try it in a nutshell. So I went to, as Asu has already informed, that I was born in a small town in Kathiawad called Surendranagar. And I went to a school called NTM High School, that is here. Interestingly, it was a co-ed school. And one could learn literally, besides languages, all other subjects. I also learned art to an extent, but not because the art teacher we had studied in the Chitrashala run by Ravi Shankar Rawal in Ahmedabad. His name was Tulja Shankar Trivedi, but he was there only for my early years. And once he took me home in his in the town next door that is called Dewan Camp. And there in that, no, please go back. Please go back. Because it was here that I first time saw some, whatever you call it, works of art. I saw a watercolor painting in the house of one of my teachers who was an Anglo-Indian. He had a British watercolor. I went to the house of my art teacher.
Yeah.
I went to his house and he showed me a kind of a watercolor gouache that he had made in the art school or whatever art classes run by Ravi Shankar Rawal. And so the school was, in a sense, my first exposure, both to both art and, if you say poetry, yes, of course. I also started scribbling poetry. And in fact, what we did was even bring out a small handwritten journal. Now, please go back. It was a handwritten journal which I used to illustrate, and one of my teachers used to write the text. So that way, it began with painting and writing. And also, in a way, the situation around me next. I could see that there were multiple shrines or kinds of what you call shrines of different belief systems. Now there was this dargah, or the shrine of Gaban Shapir. It was in the town of Vadwan next door. There was also the temple of Ranak Devi, as it is on the right. And also there was a step well. So right from my school days, I was exposed to these multiple belief systems. What I remember is that most of my friends were non-Muslims because very few Muslims studied in those days. So I had Jain friends or Hindu friends, and I had a very kind, generous Jain gentleman who even would invite me home. And I remember in those days, which was unthinkable, that we could all, even go and have dinner with him. He even took me once to a Jain shrine. When I had been to Baroda and returned during my vacation, I told this gentleman, his name was Shanti Bhai. I said, Shanti Bhai, I can tell you something about Jain painting because I have learned in my college about Jain painting. So he said, look, there are some Jain paintings in the collection of our Upashraya. And he took me there. And the Jain Muni even showed me some odd, perhaps a manuscript. So I have those vague memories of those days. I carried them with me. And then next, I was studying in the, as I said, in the NTM high school. And it so happened that one of our senior painters of Gujarat, and who was also teacher of my teacher, Ravi Shankar Rawal, who happened to be suffering from some illness and was advised to go to a place which is a dry weather. Surendranagar happened to be in a region which had a very dry climate. Now Ravi Bhai came to Surendranagar, he had nobody else to go to, and he used to visit the library which I used to frequent as a young student. And the librarian, whose son was my friend, introduced me to Ravi Bhai. And Ravi Bhai said, let me see what you paint. So I said, I make some small. So I must have shown him some watercolor that I had done. And he said, okay, let's do something here in the library. So we bought some local colors, actually black and brown, both made of soot and made of geru, red powder, and we mixed it with gum. And Ravi Bhai said that here the walls, the compound walls of the library are blank. Let us paint those walls. So I asked Ravi Bhai, I said, what to paint? Ravi Bhai said, okay, let us paint the history of the world. Oh, history of the world. I said, how do we do it? And he said, okay, I'll make a drawing and you help me. He made drawings, and then we started with invention of fire, invention of language, etc., etc. And we literally filled up the walls of the outer walls of the compound of the library with our, what we call in Gujarati, Chaya Chitra, or like shadow pictures. They were in one color, either brown or in black. So this was my first brush with art. And everybody said, well, you seem to be having a great deal of passion for painting. Why don't you go and study further? So I told Ravi, I don't think my family is financially capable of sending me to study in a college or in a university. None of my elder brothers had gone to the university. They all had studied in school. And they were all employed. Most of them had government jobs. So Ravi said, okay, but why do you worry? I'll give you a letter of introduction. But I said, well, what about money? So he said, oh, yes, there is a Saurashtra state scholarship. It is 50 rupees a month. It should be enough for you. So Ravi literally bade me to go to Baroda because he said he knows the dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts, who happened to be an artist called Markand Bhatt, who was from Bhavnagar. So I said, let's go. I told my family, and my family said, look, we cannot help you much, but if you want to go and study further on your own, you are welcome to do so. And they must have given him some money. And finally, I started. You see, I had never been outside, or I have never been to a big town, Surendranagar, or at the most Rajkot. This was my first trip. So I asked my friend, who was the son of the librarian, the same librarian who introduced me to Ravi Bhai. His name was Arvind. He was a tall boy. Arvind said, okay, I'll come up to Ahmedabad, but then you find your way. So we went to Ahmedabad and we found, because Ravi Bhai had given us his address in what you call something like Chitrakoot Society. Chitrakoot was the name of the house, and it was Brahman Mitra Mandal Society or something like that, if I remember it right. And we went there. Ravi Bhai said, look, you're going to study there, but where are you going to stay? I said, there must be hostel. So he said, look, you can't get into hostel straight away until you get admission. Okay, I'll give you another letter. So he gave me a letter written to somebody, and he said, you go and ask him if he could put you up for 2 or 3 days while you do your admission test. So here I was. I boarded the train, got down in Baroda. I must have got on to what we call Tonga, or what we in Gujarati we call it Ghoda Gadi. There were plenty of those Tongas in those days because there were no rickshaws at that point of time. And I reached an area called Raupura Tower, and I found the address. It was right on top of the building. And I went there, and there was a gentleman who was slightly bent. His name was Ram Vyas. And I gave him the letter Ravi Bhai had written. So Ram Vyas looked at the letter and looked at me. And then he said, look, my dear, if you want to stay here, you can stay in my dark room, because this is all I have. But I can only give you for the night. During the day, you are out. So I said, fine. So I put my whatever bags there. I suppose they had some toilet facility. And I stayed in the dark room for 2 or 3 days and gave my admission tests. And there began a new journey. In a way, it was a second birth of sort. So Ravi Bhai visited me when I was in second year. And this is the photograph when Ravi Bhai came to Faculty of Fine Arts. He is right in the, with a Gandhi cap. And here is myself on the extreme right. And rest are my classmates and one of the teachers. So what happened? There I was.
Next
in
image.
Baroda.
Yeah.
The city I did not know, but gradually I learned about the city. It was the Gaikwadi town. It had all kinds of, in fact, quite interesting historic buildings. This is one of the gateways. It's called Laharipura Gate in Baroda. It's still there. And there were several other buildings. But I could also see that the festivals were celebrated there. And like the Muharram Taziyas were immersed in a lake. I could also see the festivals of Ganesh Chaturthi. I could also, though I was familiar with flying kite, but Baroda was in a way a center of kite flying. So I learned so many things in Baroda, but my biggest learning was from the Faculty of Fine Arts. So the Faculty of Fine Arts, if I put it very simply, was a place which was almost like a home, in the sense that there were something like 12 to 15 teachers, or even less. And then there were about 200 students. And each teacher had about 15 students. So we could personally interact with each other. Each teacher had a kind of an equation with us. And we got to know them personally. And I'll give you one more example, that one of our teachers, the celebrated painter, N.S. Bendre, who was head of the department of painting, he used to walk in the studio. During morning, our classes were held in a studio, which he would then rearrange
Next
in the
image.
afternoon, and he would have some screens put around Vasu, and then in the studio he would paint and we would look at him. But anyway, what I was trying to say is that the secret, or one of the best things that happened to me at the Faculty of Fine Arts, is that it became my second home, because Faculty of Fine Arts was open literally 24 hours during the classrooms, class hours, and outside the class hours. The studios were open, either the teachers were working or the senior students were working, and we could interact with all of them. So what we learned most, not only from the classroom, but also from interacting besides the classroom, where we could meet seniors, where we could meet our teachers, etc., etc. And eventually, when I was in the master's course, by the way, I managed with the 50 rupees that the Saurashtra government gave me as a scholarship, which sometimes arrived, sometimes didn't, but it was okay. I did manage to survive and even to buy some paint and even make pictures. And I did my bachelor's, and after that I joined the master's course, and there was a studio which was occupied by Jyoti Bhatt, my senior. And this is my photograph of me working. It must be 1961. It was interesting that
Sheikh sir, can I just ask you one thing here? What kind of an impact Bombay Progressives had on the students at that point of time? I was just thinking about the kind of works you were doing, and I also remember seeing photograph of Sousa, in the corridors of the painting department, and you had your first show inaugurated by Hussein. So I was just wondering what kind of an impact Progressive must have had on the students at that time.
Well, I tell you my story. You see, we had teachers who were very highly competent. First of all, it was Professor Bendre. In the sculpture department, we had Shankar Chaudhary. And even in painting, perhaps at that age, at that time, Subramanian was younger, but he was a major figure. So we had the best of teachers. And we, because of Shankar Chaudhary and Subramanian, we had greater connection with Shanti Niketan rather than the Bombay progressive. But Bendre knew all the progressive artists, and Bendre knew Hussain personally. So while I think I was in my third year or so, Hussain was invited to give a demonstration, which means he would paint a picture. And we all saw, literally glued, looking at him making an oil painting. I think it was on an oil paper. Now, my interest in, I had a feeling that by the time I began to paint, when I was in master, that I was surrounded too much by my colleagues, my seniors, and my teachers. And I wanted to be out of that and wanted to find my own way. How do I find my own way? First thing was to paint. I painted, I did not know what I would paint. But as I said, that the school provided you with the possibility of working day and night. And I worked frenziedly. I must have produced literally hundreds of pictures. And in those days, we used whatever paper, whatever color that came into our hand. It was not anything very sensational, but it was something that I could then feel, I would feel that I was able to express myself. And I then decided that I would show my work. And that is why, because Hussain had been to Baroda once, so I approached him and Hussain agreed to open my show. So there was no direct influence of the progressive artist group of Bombay. But because I knew, now tell you, this photograph is the photograph where Hussain is standing in the middle, and he actually read a poem to inaugurate my exhibition. It was a wonderful experience, and you can see one of my paintings hanging, two of my paintings. I used to paint horses. Now, it can be immediately connected that Hussain painted so many horses. And I too was making horses in my painting. But the difference was that the horses that Hussain painted were timeless horses. They were symbols of what you call power, action, vigor, vitality. And they were fantastic paintings. My horse was perhaps the horse of a horse carriage, a kind of a tonga. And in a way, having been brought up in a small town where there were lots of tongas or the horse carriages which we used, somehow that kind of an horse became a kind of a motive for me to work on. So I painted a number of horses in which horse is running around looking for some kind of a, whatever it is, whether it is, and I did paint one picture in which the horse breaks off that horse carriage and runs off. So in a way, it was, you may say that it's a personal story, but in a way, this story was also important. So I went to Bombay and I showed my work, and then I came to know the artists in Bombay, especially in a place called, what is it called? It was on Warden Road. Well, artists were given studios, and Hussain, Gaitonde, Sayam Mehta,
Gulammohammed Sheikh.
Gulammohammed Desai Institute, which had a director called Soli Batliwala.
Sheikh, hello.
Soli Batliwala. And I met Hussain. Hussain took me around, introduced me to all the artists. Now, there is a difference between Baroda and Bombay. Let me tell you that. In Baroda, Bendre was my teacher. He was like Bendre Saheb. It was Subramanian, he was Mani Sir. It was Shankar Chaudhary, he was Professor Chaudhary. In Bombay, Hussain took me to studio of Tayyab Mehta and he said, this is Tayyab. He took me to the studio of Gaitonde and he said, this is Gaitonde. And they insisted that I call them by their first name. So there was a one-to-one kind of a dialogue, one-to-one relationship. And I thought, oh, these artists are living on their own, working here, which is not their own place. And they are all painting from morning till evening, sometimes at night. I think in those years, while I was painting in my studio alone in Baroda, and while I looked at these artists working in Bombay, I made up my mind that I want to be an artist. And I think that was a turning point. So in those years, in 1961 to 63, I had 3 exhibitions in Bombay. I had a student when I was teaching called Vivan Sundaram, whose father was Chief Election Commissioner, and whose wife, Indira Sundaram, was sister of a great Indian painter called Amrita Shergill. And Vivan Sundaram, when I went for my interview for the scholarship to go abroad, invited me to stay at his place. And I saw that house full of paintings of Amrita Shergill. And I realized that
There's a whole tree
there was a world of art, a great world of art to belong to. And so my journey began without my knowledge. I did not know while sitting in Surendranagar where I would land in. I did not know I was living in a small 2-room, what you call little, not even an apartment, a small place where my father lived with his 5 children in 2 rooms, 8 by 8 or 8 by 10. At that time, I had no idea. I didn't even dream of going out. So I still consider Abhibai to be my great benefactor. And I still consider Faculty of Fine Arts to be my mother institution, because it opened doors to the art of the world. I met artists whom I could address in a personal manner, who became friends, and I continued that friendship throughout their life. I mean, I became very, Tayyab Mehta even came to Baroda for a short while, and I would go to Bombay and meet Hussain and Gaitonde, etc., etc. But this is how my journey began, until in 1963, I went abroad. But before that, there is one more.
You came to meet, you came to know Octavio Paz around the same time, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, can we go a little further? Then,
next image.
You see, it was around that time, between 1961 and 63, I used to visit Delhi, and I made friends with an artist called Swaminathan. Can you see? I can put my cursor is on them. This is Swaminathan.
Visible, it's visible.
And I used to go and stay with him. I also met Ambadas, who was also there. I also met Rajesh Mehra, who was there. This gentleman, Jairam Patel, was in Baroda. Himmat Shah was in Baroda, who was my colleague, my senior. Jyoti Bhatt was my senior. And Balkrishna Patel lived in the city of Ahmedabad. Now, it was at that point of time, Swaminathan, I, Rajesh, and few others used to meet in a restaurant. It was called Shalimar Cafe. You know why? In those days, I thought that there was prohibition. But I remember that Shalimar Cafe would offer you beer, but they would give you in a glass, in a teacup or something like something, but it would be disguised. And we would all go and meet there to have beer. And that is where an idea was, literally, taking shape. And there was a lady called Jyoti Pandya who used to be in Delhi in those days, who used to read news on All India Radio. But she was originally from a town called Bhavnagar. And this lady, when we were all meeting and talking about forming a group, said that, why don't you folks come to my hometown? I will be your host. You can do what you like. Stay for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever you like. So in 1962, about 10 of us, all raw young men landed in the town of Bhavnagar, where we, perhaps, I don't know, we must have had some drink also, but we talked and talked. We must have talked a lot of rubbish. But we did talk, and we finally decided to write a manifesto. Our friend Swaminathan was very well versed in English. He formulated the manifesto, which we all signed. And we thought that now we are forming the group. But we said that, okay, if there is a group, it should have a name. But then what would you call the group? Somebody said there is a black ceiling here. In that house, one of the rooms had a black ceiling where we used to sit and discuss. But says, oh no, that's not a good thing. We do not want to call ourselves Black Ceiling Group. Then somebody must have struck this idea that, look, the number of the house of this family called Pandya family, the Jyoti Pandya, was 1890, 1890. Why don't we call ourselves Group 1890? And we all agreed. We all drank to it. And eventually, in Delhi, we launched the group. Okay, you asked me about Octavio Paz. As you know that I was writing poetry right from my school days, which I continued in Baroda. And I met my several mentors, but amongst which Suresh Joshi was my major mentor, a major literary figure of Gujarat. And I used to, I used to contribute in a journal that he edited called Kshitij, which means horizon. Now, in that, we used to publish not only the work or the writings of Gujarati and Indian writers, but also European and other writers. And somebody must have even found writings of Octavio Paz. I do remember that one of our friends, Jan Parekh, a writer, had a copy of Evergreen Review. And there was a story, Girl with Green Eyes, if I am not mistaken. And we got it translated. And then Jan tells me in 1963 that, do you know that Octavio Paz is in Delhi? I said, oh, really? And we wanted to meet him. So I went to Vivan Sundaram's mother. As I told you that her husband was chief election commissioner, so they knew everybody, all the, important people. And she said, oh yes, he has come. He's a Mexican ambassador. And he is living in a hotel because he hasn't found a place to live in. So I said, can we go and meet him? And we all went. We all means Vivan Sundaram and his sister, Navina, and I. All three landed up and knocked at his door. Octavio was delighted. He said, look, I've been meeting all the politicians. I'm glad to meet you artists. I'm so glad to meet you, artist. So, and then he even gave me addresses of friends he knew in England when I told him that I'm going there. But anyway, he then got, because I introduced him to my friends, including Swaminathan, and he struck a great friendship with Swaminathan. But for this first exhibition of the group, Swaminathan, who was he was a wonderful man. He had a political background. He was in Lokdal and he was in Communist Party, but he had given it all up and he had given himself to painting. But he also had access to somebody like the Prime Minister of India. And he said, let's go and meet Panditji. Panditji means Jawaharlal Nehru. I remember I went with him, about 4 or 5 of us. Ambadas was there, and I think Rajesh Mehra was also there. I don't know who else. Panditji, that is our Prime Minister, said, you folks want me to open an exhibition. Who am I? I am no artist. We were all very impressed to hear from a politician say that he was not qualified to open an exhibition, unlike many politicians who would be willing to do so. But Swaminathan was very clever. Swaminathan told Panditji, he said, look, we have not come to meet you as our Prime Minister. We have come to meet you as a writer. Because Jawaharlal Nehru was a writer. He has written a book called Discovery of India, one of the major books on a kind of a history of the country. And it pleased Nehru no end, and he immediately agreed. So anyway, I've taken too long on this story. So let us go further and see what else we have. So there I am, landing in London. All the, overcoat and everything. I stayed in a place called Hampstead. My friend Praful Dave took this photograph. I must have worn a coat and a tie perhaps for the first time, which I continue to wear for some time now. And then I was admitted to the Royal College of Art. Next, please. You have this college. Actually, the building here at the bottom is not the building where I studied. I studied in the old building, which was on a street called Exhibition Road. But these are the paintings I made there. As you can see, there are no horses. I tried to, this is a 6-foot painting with a self-portrait with stripes on my face. It was a period in London where everybody was trying to use what you call, Vasu, this tape.
Okay. So Scotch tape, is it?
Scotch tape. So that you remove that part, and we made sort of some kind of a border, as I did in my painting. So it was the period of the minimal art, just followed by the pop movement. One of my teachers was Peter Blake, and Peter Blake, as you know, was a very well-known pop artist of the time. But I did not do much painting. What I wanted to do was to live in England and go to Europe and see great art of the world, because I knew that I had to go to places like Italy and to see the great Italian masters. I was frequent visitor to the museums in London, in National Gallery or the British Museum, etc., and also the art galleries, Marlborough Art Gallery, etc., etc. But I did paint continually. I produced enough painting to get through my examination of what is called Royal College of Art, Associate of Royal College of Art. And I spent 3 years in England. As I said, that I did paint, but I did not paint enough because I had come to some kind of a cul-de-sac. I could not go on with my horses. I tried this kind of a tape. I did some self-portrait, But what I did, next please, was to see a lot of films. And London was a place where you could see all these great films of the world. Here it is Buñuel, here it is Fellini, then you had Godard, and you had, Louis Malle, or whatnot, all great filmmakers. To my mind, I think it was a shallow period in the world of art, and art was literally overtaken by cinema. Cinema was the most vital medium of the day in the 1960s, mid-60s. And I literally tried to see as many films as possible. That was my, that's how I spent. And then I went to Italy, I went to France, I went to Germany, and I saw all the great works of art, and returned to India after 3 years in 1966. So when I came back next, I was wondering what to do. And I was staying in a place where we had artist friends living with us. There are 3 faces at the bottom. The first one is Nagji Patel, the second was Krishna Chatpar, and the third one is Bhupen Khakkar. We all shared a kind of an outhouse. We all had our own little rooms. And in those days, there was an Indian girl who was selected as Miss World. Her name was Rita Faria. And I was quite hooked on her, looking at her photograph. So I cut out the photograph from the newspaper. I stuck it on the board, and then I tore it. And then I put image of Ravana, the demon king, abducting Sita. In that sense, what I was doing was not Sita Haran, abduction of Sita. It was something like, through painting, an abduction of Rita. That is Rita Faria. So that was my first painting. It was a kind of a collage. I built a little doorway because in the little room that I had a doorway like that. Next, please. And I met my life partner around that time. She was a student, and in 1971, we both got married. And we had given a reception. I used to live in a place which is known as Residency Bungalow, which was actually university accommodation, because when I returned to Baroda, I got the job of teaching art history, the same job that I used to have before I left for England. And then, next please. Around the same time, the artist Bhupen Khakkar, whose picture you saw before, Bhupen Khakkar and I decided to launch a magazine. And we published this journal for 4 years. It's called Vrishchik. Vrishchik means scorpion. You know how the name came about? 5 or 6 of us were sitting in Residency Bungalow having fun. And we were about to launch this journal. He said, we want to name this journal. What do we call it? Then my wife says that, and then somebody said that, what is your zodiac? My wife says she is Vrishchik. That means she is, what is it? Scorpio. Scorpio. And it so happened that there were 3 or 4 of them who were all Scorpio. So I said, okay, let's call it Scorpion. So it would have a little sting, but we would establish a dialogue with the art world of India. And we published from our own pockets. We didn't want to charge anything. If some contributions came, they were welcome. And we published it for 4 years, published all kinds of stuff, but established a connection with the art world and artists of India. Next, please. My paintings continued, and I then started painting after my journey into hinterland of India, traveling through Madhya Pradesh. I remember that we were in a bus, And in the bus, I saw all the mounts and the trees coming by on both sides. And I suddenly found the tree was higher than the mount. And I came back and I painted series of paintings. They were all full of yellows, something similar to the heat, the warm climate. And I painted these series of paintings of trees, mountains, and such things. Next, please. I also made, there was a workshop, next, please.
Next.
There was a workshop organized by United States Information Service on printmaking. I had not done, I had made prints I had made linocuts, I had made lithography, but I did not make any etching. I learned to make etchings there, and I made a series of, in this, a tree is literally removed from its earth, from earth. It is uprooting. This kind of an uprooting of the tree became an image that I continued to both paint as well as use it in my prints. But then there came a time, next please, to publish my poems. You see, I had been writing poetry all the time. I was publishing in Gujarati journals. Is there any question, Vasu, do you have about poetry or any such thing?
No, I was actually, thinking about, the modernist, period, in Gujarati poetry. And I always thought that, you had an important role to play.
Yeah, well, you see, all my colleagues in Gujarati language who wrote poetry in those days, in the late 50s,
Sheikh.
used what we call metrical verse. Do you follow what I'm saying? The meters, those were Sanskrit meters. Shardul, Vikridit, Shikharini, Vasanta Telika, etc. Or they would write songs. What happened to me, since I was introduced to the modern idiom and I painted, and I began to read poetry in the company of Suresh Joshi. I read Lorca, I read Rilke, I read Mallarmé, and I was particularly interested in Baudelaire. And I wrote poems where I literally threw away all the meters. I started writing in free verse. I started writing in the language in which you generally converse. It was not a language given to you from either a classical language or your own language, but something that came to me from sort of internally. And I began to experiment, and I published a lot of poetry. There was the possibility of publishing a collection, but I rejected that offer. But at the end, in 1974, I decided to bring together my poems, and I made it, I called it Athva. Athva means or means this or that or. Just or is the title of the collection. Next, please. Very strangely, when I started to paint those trees and those mountains and other things, suddenly ideas came to my mind, said that there have been, art that I have been associated with, in which there is a singular image. But my mind is full of many an image. I am drawn to Mughal painting, I am drawn to Piero della Francesca, I am drawn to a Sienese painter. I like photography, I like paint. How do I bring it all together? Is it possible? So I tried this experiment, which lasted for 4 years, and I called it Returning Home After Long Absence. So it's like a ghetto, like kind of a household, not exactly like the household that I lived in, but something similar to the kind of, childhood memories which came to me. I loved the tree, that's the peepal tree, so I painted every branch of this peepal tree. I painted chinar tree taken from a Persian painting. I took the angels from a Persian tree of the flight of the prophet, and I also painted flight of the prophet. But I also painted the wall, because our house was separated from other houses in my childhood, and there was a factory beyond. So I painted a little factory, and in front, I used the photograph of my mother, and I put that photograph of my mother and painted it right in front. This was not to be done in those days. People thought that we were going astray. People thought that we had lost our modernity. We did not know how to deal with, images. But that's how it came to me. And I stuck to it. So what to do? I continued to use multiple imagery, and I thought that is the only way by which I can find myself. But then in 1975, 7 or so, politically there was a very difficult climate. The government imposed internal emergency. I was making a painting with houses and people. In fact, there was a figure with multiple hands, which I had literally invoking the Indian traditional images of gods and goddesses. But as the painting progressed from 1975 to 77, 2 years it continued, I removed the figure and nothing was left except animals. And this I call speechless city. In a way, it was a response to emergency. And you would be surprised, Vasu, Jatin, it was shown in Delhi. Not many people could recognize that it was about emergency. But soon after, most people happened to understand that it is about barrenness. It is about absence of human being. And would I tell you that somebody in the pandemic told me that he was reminded of my painting, which was totally
empty.
Totally empty. And so in a way, it was 74 painting, 75, 77 painting, but it became, in a way, a haunting image for somebody in 2020, 2021. But anyway, this was but next to that, what I was doing, what I was searching for, was to combine multiple imagery to the extent possible. And this is a painting, the next painting that I'm going to show you, in a way came close to my intention. I wanted to show both inside as well as outside. I wanted to show the interior as well as the landscape. I wanted to show all that was something like, I wanted to quote something. So I quoted a nude figure from Angra. I quoted a Japanese ukiyo-e. I construed the houses at the bottom right, which were like the houses in my childhood in Surendranagar or in Vadhavan. But it also reminded me of Sienese painting. But there was a big kind of a frangipani tree, and there is a tiny figure of an old woman, something like my mother. But there is also a train going in the wilderness. So this is a kind of a painting of journey from place to place, interior to exterior, from one place to another. And in a way, you can even see that there is something of circular in that. Next, please. Immediately after that, I thought my childhood came back to me. Suddenly, as Vasu said in one of my poems, I said it was like holding my childhood in the palm of my hands. And I thought, why not? So I painted the street I lived in, but entirely imaginary, not based on a photograph. I construed as I remembered. So it is a memory image. But at the same time, it is also a memory constructed. It's not a memory which was exact memory of the place which I lived in, but there is a general geography. There is a general mapping of it, which is very similar. Because this is the street in which people lived in small, hovel-like places, men, women, children. And I think there is a tiny, what you call, self-portrait of sort, a little boy looking out. But there was a mosque. The mosque had no dome. Mosque had very tiny minarets, but it was painted green enamel color. And there people gathered and they prayed. So I painted as I remembered it. And on top of it, as you go, as though you are walking through the street from the bottom upward, right to the top. In a way, I was still making journeys. I was making journeys through painting, as though you could walk with your mind's eye into the painting. I will not dwell upon it further, but let me go further. If I'm not getting too late, is Siddharth okay? Am I all right? Or
Yes.
Slow
No,
down?
wonderful. Please continue.
But I realized something actually which I had realized in 1969 when there erupted what you call ethnic riots. It was communalism. There was a kind of a rift between communities, which was, I think, a political construct. But that made both majority communities pounce upon the minorities. In 1969, there were raging riots in the place where I was, in Baroda. And it lasted for almost a year or more. And would you believe that this continued and it still continues to an extent. But in 1980s, when I was thinking about a large painting of the city of Baroda, the city in which I lived, I had painted the township of my childhood. Now I am painting the city where I live personally. And I thought, how do I? So there was the film called Silsila, which was a kind of a pot boiler in which a matinee idol who was married, but who had a love affair with another actress. And they made a film of it, obviously for commercial benefit. And so the film is in the center of the painting. But then there is a woman who is selling vegetables. Then there are three men who are meeting just like that over a match because they want to strike a match for a bidi or a cigarette. There are women, all kinds of women are there, but there is a protagonist. But right on top, you have a riot raging. And there, the crowd is denuding a man to see whether he is circumcised or not. And that is something which, in a way, sums up the story. I won't go into further details, but this is a painting in which I put even the landmarks of the city of Baroda at the bottom on the right, and I called it City for Sale.
I just want to add one thing here, because I remember you telling, once that, this is a painting which took almost three years or 4 years for you. You started in 1981, and I think you finished it in 83, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember you once telling me, that every time you took the brush, there was an eruption of riot in the city. Perhaps that is also the reason, why the painting got delayed, to come to a completion.
I don't think that was the reason, but that was the kind of a, fear psychosis that was so pronounced that as though You see, everything that happens in the world is not happening just because it is there. Everything that happens in the world in which you are involved, you are either a witness or a participant. Even an onlooker is a participant. So in a sense, the riots that were raging were also in front of me. I was both a kind of a, whichever way, on whichever side you are, but you are a witness. And in that sense, you carry the pain of that instance, that event. And you cannot just, so every time I started to pain as though I am a riot would rage now. That was the kind of a sensation, a kind of a, you may call it a, whatever, some kind of a psychosomasis of the kind that, but that you can imagine the people who were in the middle of it, because this painting is about on the one hand, in one side of the city, the riots are raging where they are killing people, burning them. And on the other side, people are watching a cinema, which is a pot boiler, without being affected by it. This is the world. This is the life we are leading. And in a way, that brutality of that experience made me feel so. And so if I said something of that kind, it was to express the fear psychosis of some kind that was part of it. Now, that was in 1984, and I was traveling with some, in fact, there was a committee set up by the government of India to look at European works of art in Indian collections. And I had received a little postcard, and my my committee members, Mildred Archer, great scholar of Indian art, Robert Skelton from the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I traveled with them, and I showed this postcard to them. It was written in French and I couldn't make out. Next, please. So Mildred Archer read it and she said, Gulam, you've been invited by the Centre's Georges Pompidou to have your exhibition. And this is a letter from the director. Oh God, I didn't know that he would write a little postcard and given to the Indian postal system, which is so erratic. It still reached me. And they said that, well, they want to show a corpus of my work. Something like whatever, they have a big gallery in which they want to, it is part of Festival of India in France. And I won't go into details of it, but the exhibition did take place. And I went there. They allowed.
Next image.
Sorry? 1985. This is the opening of perhaps a day after, when Madame Pompidou visited the show. Can you believe the wife of the great Pompidou took time off to come to see my exhibition? And the next to her is our ambassador, Idris Latif, and others, anyway. So it was a great moment for me. I stayed in Paris with Nilima. Number of days, they gave me a studio. I gave a series of talks. I traveled to Italy. I went and saw Mahabharata, which was staged by Peter Brook in Italy, in a small town outside Florence. And I did all that anyway. But that was the experience of being in Paris. So in a way, world was coming to me instead of me going to the world. It was in a way returning to me. I was trying to embrace the world, and the world was perhaps reciprocating. Next, please. Next is also equally surprising phenomenon. You wouldn't ever believe that in Indian government, or especially in a state government, ours is a federal structure, Jale, in which we have number of states. So in which there is a state which is in the center of India, it's called Madhya Pradesh, which means central India. And there was an architect called Charles Correa who had designed the assembly building, assembly for it's the legislative assembly. And he wanted me to do a mural for that building. He wanted other artists also. He even got a tribal artist to paint. And I went there to sit with him, and he said, you paint what you like. Now, in which government would tell you that do what you like? And they said, okay, this is the budget we have. Can you do it within that? I said, budget is no issue, but the time. And they said 3 months. I said, no. I chose a wall which was 31 foot high and 21 foot wide inside the building, which was the door of the upper house. I said, it will take me at least 6 months. And they said, yes, can you believe it? I couldn't believe it. My wife couldn't believe it. And I started working. I enrolled some of my students, even my students, and a team of about 11 of started working. And we worked day and night. And I made 3 paintings, out of which I selected one to enlarge. And with my assistants, we were able to make 13 panels, which we mounted and went with our own carpenters to the city of Bhopal. And we mounted the entire mural in oil. It is in oil. It's mounted on a board. But then we had a special clamp made for it to hold it on the wall. And there is a door, which I also painted. And I called it Tree of Life. And you may ask me the question, why? Jatin, I had always a desire in my heart that someday I would like to paint a whole tree. A tree-sized tree. How could I do it? Here was an opportunity. So I decided to use the motif of a tree, which I had painted earlier. And I built around images from both central India, that is the place where it is situated, and also from Indian tradition and from various other places. And I, in a way, construed a kind of a, what you call, tree for life, tree of life. Next, please. So this tree of life is mounted, and I have all these houses and trees and people, stories from different times, different regions, but also the stories relating to Union Carbide. As you can see it on the right, that white building with a little yellow man. It is the Bhopal gas tragedy. If you were to use, you see this one. I also brought Narmada Dam because that is the contested. Environmentalists are fighting against it even now. And I brought as many things as possible, and I made, this mural, the largest painting of my life. In the 60th year of my life, I thought I would find it very difficult to do it. And first I even had apprehensions, but my dear wife, Nilema, bade me and told me, she said, look, if you don't do it now, when will you do it? This is the time. And we, in fact, made it in little less than 6 months, and it was mounted there. Next, please. As we have talked about, the communal divide, we have talked about how the communities are divided on the basis of their beliefs. And I was exposed to poetry of this great poet called Kabir. He's a 15th, 16th century poet. And I returned to this poet around that time because the riots were still raging. The communities were still divided. They still continue to remain divided. And when I read it, I thought there is something that I could do. How do I paint Kabir? I don't know the image of Kabir. How do I make the image of Kabir? So I found a late 18th century painting, but it had a caste mark and everything. I removed that. And I used just the image of a lean man with some kind of a little headdress. And I construed it like Kabir, who stands in front of you. Now, one thing which I want to say is that I wanted to deal with the belief system, but I wanted to bring it in the realm of the secular. I wanted to bring the sacred into the realm of the secular. And this is exactly what Kabir was doing. Kabir said that Tera sain tujhme, jag sake to jag. He said that the great, whatever your Lord, whom you are seeking, whoever, is within you. It's not outside you. It's within you. So this particular one is about Kabir, and his stanza runs like this. Ya ghat bhitar sur chand hai, ya ghat naulakh tara. What Kabir says. It is in this very body, in this very cell, rest. Ya ghat bhitar, rest sun and moon, and the millions of stars within your own self, your own body. So I made a series of Kabir painting, and then there was another next place. I thought that I would bring something else of Kabir. That's one other aspect of Kabir. It's like something which is ironic, but it's like saying that the Satan quotes the scripture. You must know this. There is a famous saying that Satan quotes the scripture. So Kabir uses a particular form of poetry which is called Ulat Basi, which means something like something upside down. It's not really the way it is, but it is something the other way around. So it is like the guru falls at the feet of the disciple. It's like the cat is eating a dog, etc., etc. It's like all kinds of things. But the world has become topsy-turvy, upside down. So he calls it, and that particular poem is called Ek achamba dekha re bhai, thada singh charave gai. He said, look, I saw a wonder. Such a great wonder that a lion was guarding the cows. Could it ever happen? So I decided to use the image of Kabir as a landscape, the face as a landscape, and I placed all these little figures on top of it, literally sometimes taking off from the stanzas of Kabir, sometimes cooking up my own Kabir. Next, please. I think I'm going a little overboard, but let me tell you, this is very important. Since you have seen that in my childhood, I saw the shrine of a peer, I saw a temple, and I saw all the religions coming together. I wanted to find some kind of a motive with which to work. And I saw one, what is called, it's a box, a wooden box, which had multiple doors, which opens in 3 directions. The traditional box is something which performers used to wear on their body. It was made in a light wood, and they would open it and they would only paint images of gods and goddesses. What I decided was to make it four-sided. And I made it into a kind of a portable shrine, which is called kawad in Rajasthan. But I'm using it in a generic sense, not in a specific sense. And I painted images all around. So it is like bringing together as many things as possible. So it is not a shrine which is a house of God. This shrine is made of all kinds of images, including the demons. Because you see, demons also live within us. We don't recognize the demons within us. I even painted one whole shrine with images of demons from the Indian painting. This one is called Journeys, and I made it into, as you can make art, it has to be personally opened and closed. The doors have to have images on all sides, both front and back. Next, please. And this is how it can be folded up. And this one is also part of the same kawad called Journeys. Next, please. And this one is called Migration. But here I am invoking the image of Kabir. On the right is the traditional image of Kabir. As I mentioned that I used the face of a traditional Kabir image, and that was from that. On the left is the image of Kabir painted by an artist who had only one eye. And he painted a very large 88-foot long mural in Shantiniketan called Vinod Bihari Mukherjee. He painted Kabir. But when he wanted to paint Kabir, he didn't know. So he went to the houses of weavers, because Kabir was a weaver. And he took the likeness of a weaver and made his Kabir. And that is the one which I am quoting there in this particular, what you call it, portable shrine or kawad. I will not go into details of this. I'll go further. Next. Then I thought that all kawads were small, about 4 feet, 5 feet, and when they opened out, I wanted to make one in which you could walk into. So I made a 7-foot high kawad, and I quoted from my own paintings. I called it Kawad Home, and we built it, all the doors, and we painted it. Again, I had a series of associates, assistants, and we worked for months together, and we literally built it up. I think next, this is when it is closed. When it is closed, it becomes a box. When it is open, it opens in all directions, 24 feet wide. And you have all the doors. And on the left side in front, if you see, these are the characters which I've chosen from different traditions of painting, from Persian, from Italian, from German, from Indian. And on the other side are characters from European and various other. They are all having a dialogue, a kind of a meeting. So this kawad or this shrine is a place of meeting. You are bringing them together. I also made image of Gandhi in that. I also made several other images, and that is how. Then there are 3 more images in which are part of this kawad. Next, please. And these 3 are parts of same kawad. Since we started with home in Surendranagar, my hometown, that is at the top, floating above. In the middle, there is a boat in which there are, some houses on the corner, and there is a lake-like thing, and the figures are seated there. Around the lake are houses taken from the city of Baroda. This is a digital collage. It's about 7 by 7. And on the left, I have placed Gandhi when he came from South Africa to India, taken from the painting of Abanindranath Tagore. And on the right is Kabir. And in the middle, all the figures which I had painted life-size, you saw in the previous photographs of kawad. Next, please. So, and then I thought I would build another tree. This time it is not tree of life. It is a speaking tree. So I built a tree by using images of a chinar tree from Persia, from Kashmir, from etc., from different paintings. And we part painted, part we used digital technology. We put musicians, dancers, everybody, but at the same time, the image of Bamiyan Buddha, also the refugees of Iraq, also the riots in Ahmedabad and Baroda, also singers, etc., etc. And at the bottom, there are two women who are taken from the painting of Fra Angelico. At the crucifixion, the two ladies, Madonna and another, they are mourning. So this is the tree, which is a speaking tree, speaking in multiple languages, multiple terms, multiple ways. And these two women are guarding that tree. Next, please. And the third one, I made it into a kind of, it was made into a material which can be lit from behind. So I put it on the top and I made it into a sky. And on the right are the walls of the ruins of a cotton mill in my Surendranagar town. At the bottom and top, you have the houses from the city of Baroda where I live. In the sky, there are both angels and demons hovering around, called visitors of the sky. This was right in the middle of that cover. Next, please. As you can see that I was interested in mapping, but I actually started making maps. After seeing a map called Abstoff Mappamundi, made in 13th century Europe, called Map of the World, and I thought that I will make my own map. And I began to change that map, erasing borders, creating different worlds within the map, bringing in different figures, some of my favorites like Kabir on the right at the top. These are the cardinal figures guarding the world. You have Kabir, you have Mary Magdalene at the bottom on the left. When she saw Christ appearing after resurrection and she goes to touch him and Christ said, Noli me tangere, I am no longer the physical person that I was. Don't touch me. And on the left, there is the image of Majnu, the lovelorn hero of the Eastern world, both India as well as Persia and many other parts of the world, where he wants to see his beloved from whom he is separated. So he employs an old woman, and he becomes like a naked fakir, with a little thing covered around his loins. And she puts a leash on his neck and takes him to the tent of Layla. The Sufis say that when Majnu went to see Layla, and Majnu means mad, by the way. The meaning of the word Majnu is mad. That he was physically mad, but when he saw Layla, when he had the didar or the darshan of his beloved, he became truly mad. That means ishq majazi and ishq hakiki, the worldly love and the spiritual love. So I wanted to quote that these are the cardinal figures on four sides. There is another, an elderly man dancing. I won't go into details of it. I made some 30 odd maps. Next one is also another one, but you can see something else happening. It's a fortress, again using the same map, but part painted, part printed. And there are two dervishes, Turkish dervishes, I saw in the city of Istanbul and photographed. I used these images from elsewhere, but I put them there. Next, please. Then I made a video of the Mappa Mundi, and that video was shown in an exhibition in which my work was shown. So on the top, you can see the Mappa Mundi in the middle and the clouds, etc. And at the bottom is the cover, that is the big shrine you could walk into. That was also shown there at the bottom. Next, please. Then I painted this large painting when I had an invitation from the Kochi Biennale, that major exhibition of international art taking place in the region of Kerala, place called Kochi. And I decided to bring Gandhi and Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama was the first European traveler who came to India, with which India opened to colonizers. So in a way, it is an image of colonizing, and on the left is Gandhi, the one who freed us from the colony that India was. And in the middle is the map of the world, but it is literally in which images of Indian figures, Indian history, and even Chinese figures are included. Next, please. Next, please. I decided to paint another big city painting. And this time I thought that what would I do? I had painted City for Sale that had all the figures. But this time I wanted to take into account the entire city. How do I do it? And my WizKid young friends told me about Google Earth. And in the Google Earth, they showed me how world is visible. And we could zoom into India, zoom into the Gujarat, zoom into Baroda, and we could see the city. So we took that photograph, and I used the basic, what you call arteries, the roads, main roads of the city of Baroda. And we started drawing on a canvas. That canvas, as you can see on the right side, and on the left is a drawing. And we literally started making houses of people, and we drew everything from our head, sometimes from photographs, sometimes from whatever source that. And at the bottom, we built a kind of a paper mache ground. So there is the city of Baroda is standing. That is the old city, and the new city at the bottom, which is a kind of a semicircular at the bottom, which my associates are looking at. Next, please. This will show you the whole picture. This is how it came about. It is just called city. And then there are these little paper mache images I made are the people who had lost their homes. And they are coming to look for the houses they had lost. So in a way, this was the city that I was about to. And I brought, it is everything, all beautiful parts of it's some reference to China also, but I won't go into that because we are already running late. Next, please. But the painting that I wanted to do was about Ahmedabad and Gandhi, but Gandhi is no more. But Ahmedabad also has convulsed under communal riots for a number of times. But I did then finally make an image of Ahmedabad. I chose the map of the center of Ahmedabad, the old city of Ahmedabad. I brought some of the well-known sites also. I brought ordinary people around. We built in almost black and white, except for the fire, that was the fire of burning vehicle during the riots, that red one, red side, and also a lane opening into the painting. But I also included in this, at the bottom, I don't know whether you can see, the few objects, the possessions that Gandhi had. He had a watch, he had spectacles, he had slippers, and he had a book. These are the things which are scattered around the city of Ahmedabad at the bottom. I don't know whether you can make out, but you can see that little bowl and a little thali, and that is also part of it. This is a large painting. It's about 10 feet wide and 7 feet high, and all painted intricately. Next, please. So my journey comes to the world again. I started with home, and here is a 72-foot painting plus digital imagery that I made for the airport in the city of Bombay. It is near a, what you call travel, you walk, there's a travelator. And it has 6 discs inside the image in the painting, which have been set to sort of in a particular mechanical, what is it called? It is so that if you are within the radius of 8 feet, they will begin to rotate slowly, like the world is rotating. All 6 of them, one by one, rotate. If you are out of the radius of 8 feet, it would stop. But you can see this from image to image, from word to word, from place to place. In the end, there is the image of Kabir in that. But the last image I am showing you has nothing else. I had, as Vasu or Siddharth had read out my introduction, in which he said, I have dabbled in all kinds of techniques. I've used printmaking, I also made ceramics, I also wanted to make stained glass windows. And how to make stained glass windows. So it's very difficult. But I managed to get one of our one of the teachers in the Faculty of Fine Arts, Rashidharan, had been to Scotland and had studied making of stained glass windows. And I made these 2 stained glass windows for a place in Goa, which have been recently, last year or year before, they are installed. Thank you very much for this big journey that I hope I have made myself clear. Vasu, I'm sorry I had to go on because it was taking too long.
No, absolutely fine. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I think we should open it to everyone, to ask something if there is some questions.
Sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. Sheikh.
Thank you, my dear Jale. Jale is my Turkish friend who is there from Ankara.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Later, I'd like to say something later, after Jatin.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah,
No, please go ahead. I have many things to tell Sheikh.
I met, I knew Gulammohammed's paintings in a visit at the Pompidou Center. And I was so enthusiastic. It struck me because it was such a different painting than what you would see in Paris, in London, in New York, and so on. And the first time we had a meeting in Turkey on art, we invited Gulammohammed to come to Turkey, and he came twice. And both he talked about something very important, about art bringing together people of the world in one world of the heart, of love, and so on. So Gulammohammed, also, I think one of your important deeds in life, you have been a great teacher. And you sort of developed, as much as I can see, because I went to Baroda several times, to give lectures in the school that you had founded. And so your infinite creativity in producing images, in producing poetic images in your paintings, but also you gave so much to your students. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to listen to you. I'm going to talk about this to my students, and I hope that maybe next semester you can spend about half an hour talking to my students on aesthetics and the importance of art. Thank you so much. Thank you so
my
much.
pleasure, Jale. It will be my pleasure to talk to your students.
Lovely.
Jatin,
Yeah.
this is Aftab Sheikh,
Hi.
Delhi.
Hi. How are you?
I watched this program with great fascination.
Lovely.
I had the pleasure of being at an exhibition of several painters, including Gulam, at the Mori Museum in Tokyo. He may remember, in 2008. And of course, I had the pleasure of hosting Nilima along with Vivan, whom he mentioned, an old friend of mine from my childhood, at an exhibition of their work, 4 other painters, in Worpswede, which is slightly outside Bremen, and then at an art workshop in Braunschweig in Germany, in the state of Lower Saxony. So I just wanted to say, Jatin, that your center that you have created, and I see that you do this every 2 weeks with different painters, is a wonderful contribution to the world of art. And I'm delighted to have an opportunity of being with Gulam Sheikh, from about whom I've learned so much from Vivan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you very much. I'm quite impatient to share, reminiscing many things with Sheikh. I remember his show in 1963 of the horses, lino cut, very large ones, at the Jahangir Art Gallery, at the Taj Art Gallery in Bombay, the Taj Mahal Hotel. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
1963.
Yes.
And then I also recall the in-house poetry readings that used to take place at Nana Chowk, was it? At Suresh Joshi and a few other Gujarati poets, where I used to come. Near Kem's Corner. You know. Then the other is Bhulabhai Memorial Institute, where I had a studio in 1959, and Hussain was near Bombay Central, and he and his elder son, they all came, and he had a studio next to mine. Gaitonde was upstairs, Dasrath Patel. It was a unique center which do not exist anymore, unfortunately. It's Madhuriben Desai and Soli Bhai Batlibala who looked after the place, and we had to give 1 rupee a day. That's it. That was the rent. And little rooms that everybody was working. There were many, many stalwarts were there. There was Ravi Shankar, there was Al-Qazi, Satyadev Dubey, there was Bina Chitnis, and many others. Savawala and all the artists used to come there. So that was another thing. And the other is Sheikh and I and and many others, all the artist names that he mentioned, used to meet a lot in the 60s and 70s until mid-80s. And then I don't know what happened, that we're all disintegrated and in various groups, or people are older, or maybe whatever the reason. And but his work is so fantastically poetic and narrative, and with his journey. Another thing I recall now, that he talked about the riots. There was some allegation or attack on Sheikh, and I happened to be in Baroda. And I collected 200 signatures about protecting him. I remember, I don't know which year, Sheikh, which year was it?
It was late 80s and early 90s, twice.
Possibly. So I remember that. And, where are these linocuts that you did of horses? They're large. Do you still have some, or have you sold them all?
I have some, but it was a big lino cut. It was 6 foot.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Very large. I remember that.
That I don't know where it has gone.
But I remember the show, and we were together at it, 63. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. And it's good for artists, for historians, for students. And you encompass and cover the entire history and the art world. Wonderful. And thank you for your presentation.
Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? Anyone would like to address Gulam Bhai right now?
Yep. This is Katie Abindran here.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please, please.
Sure.
And after that, Tara Sabarwal, please. Yeah.
Gulam, as usual, it was a fabulous session.
Okay.
I think your capacity as a storyteller is also one thing that you have to add to that varied list of capabilities that you have. You're a great storyteller, and it's really been nice to hear how the progression of your work in parallel to your life experience. That was fabulous. Now I have the first time that I really took notice of your work was rather late in your career, but not so late for me, was in 1980 or 81. There was an exhibition called A Place for People in Delhi. And I was those days living in Hyderabad. I, by chance, happened to be here. And I just went in to see the works in the gallery at Triveni. And it was a mind-blowing exhibition for me, because for the first time I saw your work along with Vivan, Nalini Malani, and Sudhir Patwardhan, and also Bhupen Kakkar in one place. And many of these paintings that you showed today, particularly of the streetscapes and the houses and the speciality of small towns, was so vividly imprinted in my mind. For me, it was a big milestone of an exhibition. I still remember it so clearly, because it influenced the way I thought about art subsequently. But you don't seem to have mentioned that at all. So would you like to comment on it, Gulam?
On what?
On the exhibition called A Place for People.
You see, it was a period. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
It was a period late 70s. There were no art galleries. There were very few. And it was at one level difficult for individual artists to have large shows or have even an exhibition. That was one reason. Another was that there was also some kind of a meeting of minds. Some of us were communicating with each other for a long time. And our work was in a way somewhere converging into it. Not that we were working in a similar direction. We were all working, yet at the same time, there was one particular aspect that we were referring to our own environment. We were also focusing upon our own life. It was also confessional to an extent. Like Nalini Malani was painting what she called her life, her story, which means history and her story, something. And in a way, since our dialogue finally moved into a direction where we thought that perhaps we could join hands. And if we could join hands, what do? We are not going to form a group, but we want to show together so that we are at this particular point of time if all these works of 6 artists put together, then perhaps, a new idea, whatever it is, that can be presented. And we also thought that somebody like Geeta Kapoor, a writer, who was with us for a long period of time, and we thought that we would include her as one of us, a 7th person. And so she could contribute whatever she wanted to contribute. She need not write on our work. But she can contribute her own writing, an essay, and we would publish it. So we all got together. We all put money from our own pockets. We booked Jahangir Art Gallery first, and first exhibition was held there. And then the second exhibition took place in Rabindra Bhavan in Delhi, where, Katie, you saw it. But this is how it was. But it was not something that was meant to be a group to sort of remain. It was a kind of a coming together, meeting of minds of sort. And this is how we, how that, and the name of the exhibition was also an issue. Sometimes what do we say? And then after many options, I think this name we stuck because there is something about place and something about people. So that's why it is called Place for People. And in a way, it relates to works of all of us. So that is how it came about.
There was a question from Tara Sabharwal. You raised your hand.
Tara. Hi, Tara.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Sheikh.
Good to see you here.
Lovely to be here. I'm quite emotional, actually, seeing your work and hearing. So, but I just wanted to, I have a question for you, and also want to remind everybody that besides Sheikh Bhai as an artist, he was a teacher, and he has been instrumental in opening our hearts and minds, to so many students. And we look to him for a way to navigate this whole crazy world of art. To be working in Baroda when Sheikh Bhai was also working there, the teachers, as he said, worked with us. They were working all around us. And it was like a parallel growth in a way, that they were growing and discovering as we were. It was just amazing, that experience. So besides that, I found you very instrumental in developing how to feel and how to think in this world as well. I mean, just 2 incidents I would say here. One was, I remember coming back in a bus from some trip, and everybody in the bus is singing some kind of very sexist Bollywood song. And I was sitting with Sheikh Bhai, and he was actually telling me, this is not a very good song. This song is actually very belittling. And I suddenly had another antenna on, and I saw it in a different way. So it was just like my first feminist awareness was through that kind of moments. And also in a very innocent way, asking Sheikh Bhai about some riots at Sursagar that, I was very young, and I remember saying something like, people say Muslims eat meat, so maybe that's why this riot happened, or something ridiculous like that. And very kindly, very openly, very generously, Sheikh Bhai would answer the class and take that opportunity to talk to everybody and about what was going on. And so my question to you now is a very difficult question, and it is a question that we all ask ourselves today as we face what is going on in India and the difficulty of the pain that you feel, but we also share with you, Sheikh Bhai, when we see the divisiveness, the scapegoating going on. I know you have taught us to see the larger humanity, and you have found peace through your work, through Kabir, but we struggle as well, and we feel this moment. And if you just want to say a few words about how you navigate it and how you...
No, you see, my dear Tara, we all know that we have to navigate, sink or swim. But if we decide, if we have a determination, then we would be able to find our way, we have to, even I don't know what example to give, even if I will to say how even animals find their way. But as human beings, we have to keep our doors open as much to allow as many human beings possible. You have to let them enter you.
Yeah.
Do not block them. Do not keep them out. I'm not talking about art alone. I'm talking about, I'm interested in all art, great art, wherever it is, in whichever part of the world. But also human beings, sometimes, people are very, gullible. Sometimes people are just taken for a ride. Sometimes people are incited. Sometimes there are all kinds of people, but then if you keep your mind open and allow them to enter your life, somewhere there is a way to perhaps begin a dialogue. That dialogue is very important. Keep having a dialogue. The day we miss having a dialogue, I think it will be a very difficult day. Second thing, one or two things I'll just say, just to ruminate. One is, it's, there are difficult times, there are dark times. There are difficult times and dark times, as we know. But if you remember Bertolt Brecht's very famous saying that, will there be singing in the dark times? And the answer is, yes, there will be singing about the dark times, which means that you work, you continue to work, you continue to, be yourself, in whichever way you can. Don't make yourself, inflated. Don't make yourself too small. Make yourself what you are, something like that. And the third thing which I want to say is this, that in many a discourse in our life, I know that people are very disappointed. People would say, it's not there. Some of them just talk about a politician and said, oh God, we want to get away from this. Sometimes people make all kinds of spiel and you see that it's not real, people are just talking, they are not, it's not a real dialogue. It is just something because of whatever gains that they want to have, because everything is made with a purpose to acquire something, acquire prestige, acquire money, acquire this, acquire that, etc. All of them are doing that. And that's why you feel kind of a sense of hopelessness. What I'm trying to say is this, that art is synonymous to hope. Art is hope incarnate. Art doesn't allow hope to go away. Art would allow you to keep going. I don't want to use the word creativity, etc. But I say that whatever you do with your hand, with your head, your mind, and if you do that, the hope remains alive. And I think that is what would keep us going. That's all.
Thank you, Gulam bhai. I think we have the unenviable task of wrapping up, because it's been such a lovely dialogue, and just to listen to you. We are over by half an hour, and I think it was just such a lovely thing. I can see a lot of raised hands, and I feel really terrible having to do this, but thank you very much for doing this and for sharing your journey and your life, such generosity. And I think someone has made a mistake. Yeah,
we continue the dialogue,
and I hope that you will engage like this
with the work that you are doing.
Yeah. And for everyone, if any of you want to listen in on every second Saturday at 6 p.m., we do this Meet the Artists series. And thank you once again. Gulam Bhai.
And will this be available on YouTube or somewhere?
Yes, completely. On the same links that have been shared before. So yeah, and there are a lot of people who've joined on the YouTube who, there are as many who are there as here. So yeah.
Wonderful.
And sorry about not letting others have a go at
That's fine.
asking Gulam Bhai, but we're really out of time. So
Well,
thank you.
lovely seeing you after a
Thank you.
very long time.
Thank you.
Thank you, my dear
Thank
Siddharth,
you.
and thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you, everyone.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
Tara.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
Vasu.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jale. How nice to
Thank
see you.
you. Thank you, Sheikh. Was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Sheikh Bhai. Archana here.
Bye. Bye. Bye.